Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Anthony Criniti IV here, also known as Dr. Finance, and you're on the Dr. Finance Live podcast. We have an amazing guest today, John David Mann. He is a several-time New York Times best-selling author. He is also the co-author of The Go-Giver. We had Bob Burg on earlier. He is the co-author with Bob Burg on the famous Go-Giver book. He's also here to talk about his new book and some other things he's got in the works. So let's give a warm welcome to John David Mann. Welcome, John. How are you, sir?
I'm great. I'm fantastic. It's great to finally be here in the room.
Absolutely. Pleasure to have you. And John, we've actually had him on the Clubhouse app on stage several times so far, and he's been amazing over there, really building a great following. So, John, we want to get to know you a little more for our Dr. Finance Live podcast. I have a lot of questions, figure about 2-3 minutes each. Let's start with an overview of you, John. If you want to tell us a little about your life story, starting from maybe childhood.
Yes.
Tell us all about yourself.
I was born on a Tuesday. I think it was cloudy. No, I won't go into that much detail. So I started out in life as a classical musician. My dad was a choral conductor and a musicologist, college professor. My mom was a music teacher and an English teacher. So I have kind of an academic and classical music background, but I've always had interests that pulled me here and pulled me there. My career has been kind of like a pinball machine. And so I bounce from thing to thing. Gosh, that makes me sound flaky. Anyway, I started out in classical music. I was a performing cellist and a composer, award-winning composer. I won state grants to compose. And then at one point I decided I was keenly interested in the state of health of the people sitting out in the audience listening. And that my life couldn't be satisfied playing beautiful music from the stage when I couldn't do more to help lift the people in the audience than just play beautiful music. Not that is a bad thing, it's a wonderful thing. I got very interested in nutrition and natural health. And I made that my career for a while. And that took me ultimately into sales and direct selling. And I got involved in that world, the world of nutritional supplements, nutritional superfoods and things like that. And in all these different things that I did, I forgot to mention that when I was 17, I dropped out of high school and some friends and I started our own high school. Which we sent graduates on to places like Harvard and Yale and state colleges, and it was a very very accomplished institution, which is weird for a bunch of high school kids having started it. But that was kind of my foray into the education world. So in all these different worlds, nutrition and education and sales, and I always seemed to be the guy who ended up editing the journal or editing the article or editing the brochure. And eventually I ended up being a professional editor. I edited for a couple of different sales and business journals for over a decade, learning how to make other people's stuff better. And that ultimately led to co-authoring books with people and eventually authoring books. And that's my life now. I've sort of backed into becoming an author. It wasn't my intention, but that's where the pinball machine took me. And I love it. That's where I am.
Well, thank you, John. So for your story, we could spend a little more time than the other questions. So just trying to get to know you a little better. So you said you were originally from New Jersey, right?
Yes, I'm a Jersey boy. This is true.
Which is cool because I'm being from Philadelphia. Most likely you like the Phillies.
And I have a lot of Philadelphia roots. I lived in Germantown for a year and taught there. My dad lived there for many years. My brother went to school there. So yeah, I have deep Philly roots.
Wow. That's great. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So, all right. So you started in basically New Jersey, and how did you end up moving to Florida, where you're at now? Like, what was the journey like to get to that point?
I spent a lot of time in New England when I was a kid, as a lot of guys in the Mid-Atlantic states do. Summer in Maine and Vermont and New Hampshire and places, camp in Massachusetts. And I ended up wooing and winning and marrying a girl from Greenfield, Massachusetts, who's now my wife, Anna, who grew up here. And so I've lived in Massachusetts for most of my life, honestly. And what happened was it got cold. And one year, we ended up living part of the year in Florida and part of the year. So right now, I'm actually in the middle of Western Massachusetts in the foothills of the Berkshires, and we love it up here. I split my time.
Oh, okay. Did you say you went to school in Boston too, or Massachusetts?
No, I didn't. I wasn't kidding. I dropped out of high school in Jersey and started this school in the Oranges, West Orange, East Orange, South Orange. The school moved around in that area. After that, I never went back to school. I studied at Yale for a short time. I studied in Manhattan music for a short time, but I never went to college, really. I never got a degree. So I've been like self-taught at everything that I've been involved in. Never went to school in Massachusetts. I lived in Brookline, Boston for 10 years, drove cab, worked at a natural food store, worked at a couple of journals, and, sort of learned by doing.
That is extremely interesting, John. That's a testimonial, because I have to commend you. You're like an idol in what you do. I like writers that are well accomplished, especially someone like yourself. You are extremely successul.
It's interesting. It's interesting how many amazing writers started out doing something else. Had other careers.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like people like Lee Child and Adrian McKinty and Kate Atkinson, all kinds of Jim Patterson, who was an ad guy for years before he became a writer. Now he's the most published writer in the world. It's interesting about writers. So yeah, I've done a lot of different things.
Now, question on the academics, John, because I didn't know that about you. How do you become a successful writer? And obviously you love education, but
Yes,
I would have thought that you would have did great in college because you're so smart.
The fact that I haven't gone to school, strictly speaking, I haven't gone to college, I haven't gone to grad school, certainly, that I don't have a formal education in writing doesn't mean I haven't been studying. As I said, I have an academic background. My dad was an academic. My mom was an academic.
Oh, okay.
I love to learn. And so I have studied writing like crazy all those years that I was editing. I was also, I like to examine things and kind of take them apart. When I was in high school, when I was still in the traditional high school, the teacher at the front would say, okay, students, take out your books and take notes. And I would take out my spiral bound music staff notebook and start writing down notes. I mean, music. I would sit there and try to notate music that I'd heard that I held in my head, and I would notate it as best I could. And then when I got home after school, I would compare that to the real thing on the record player and see, oh, I got this wrong, I got that wrong. I've been taking stuff apart and seeing how it works since I was a kid. And I've certainly done that with writing. I've really made it my study, not formally. I have found a couple of teachers over the years that I've studied with privately, I've taken classes with, or online classes that have been magnificent. You can learn so much about just about anything these days. There's so much available online. It's fantastic. So I've kind of cobbled together, I guess, my own university as best I could. And that's what I do.
And that's a really, I commend you on that, because I'm also, even though I have the education from the academics, I also,
Yes,
a lot of what I have learned, probably more than what I've learned, is from self-education, which makes me different. I did similar to you, but you had a head start. So, it's crafting your own itinerary and saying to yourself at a certain point in life, what do I want to learn in life? Like, there's so many opportunities to go anywhere we want, learn whatever we want. How do you want to craft that education? Now, in my case, I actually built travel into that itinerary. I traveled all over the world. Starting from when I was 19, I went on a boat, sailed around the world on a program called Semester at Sea.
Oh, fantastic.
So like, that's why I commend you. You actually created your own program to go into the knowledge base that you have to write books, because you can't write books unless you have an extreme knowledge base to pick from. So
extreme knowledge base, and also sort of the ability and the enjoyment of a love for going after new knowledge when you need it. And two of the two writers I work with most, the two co-authors I work with most are Bob Burg, whom you mentioned, and Brandon Webb, the Navy SEAL, which I wrote this new book with. And Brandon and I have done 7 books together. Bob and I have done the whole Go Giver series together. Both of those guys read like crazy. They're different in just about every way possible. Bob Burg, the incredibly sweet sales guy, and Brandon Webb, a former Navy SEAL sniper, right? They're both just book fiends. They suck up knowledge. And that's, I think, so important. I'm not saying that the path I've taken is the best one or the right one or the one everyone else should take, dropping out of school and creating my own. I think, in some ways, I almost regret not having gone through, let's say, a good MFA program or something like that. It would be fun to do. I would love doing it. But, every person has their own path and their own circumstance. But you have to be able to take a new area and whatever you're doing and dig in and go after knowledge, be really discerning and learn for yourself. This is the only way you can really master something in a meaningful way. So yeah, one of the things that I find most interesting in a person is people who love to learn, people who have a love for finding out new stuff.
Thank you, John. Appreciate that. So John, on the same theme, what role has, I talk a lot before I want to qualify this question. My last book, The Survival of the Richest, I talk about going off, creating my own itinerary.
Yeah.
I had, and this is why I think, me and Brandon are going to hit it off very well. I went into the area of survival to attach it to finance. So I had to dig deep on a subject that was not really explored in the way I did. And I want to know, because what I learned a lot about, in an academic sense, struggling. My life is full of struggles. I'm sure yours is too. So I want to learn about what role the struggle has played in helping you to survive and prosper in your life.
Ooh, yeah. I mentioned the pinball thing, and that wasn't just kind of a fun image. I do feel a little bit like a pinball, in that a lot of the things in my life that have been the greatest blessings and most of the things that have been the greatest hardships and greatest difficulties, I didn't plan any of them. So none of them, I didn't sign up for this stuff, but it's all shaped me in the way that it has to become who I am. And that goes with what you're saying. I have, when I was a kid, my first child died at the age of 10 months. Now, that's not something that I would wish on anybody, but it changed me. It was a tragedy, but it also left me not scarred, I would say, as much as marked. In the Go Giver Leader, it's the second Go Giver parable. There's a passage in there where Aunt Elle, the sagey old lady, says to the hero Ben, it's a character. It's for an old word that means an engraving or a mark. And that's what character is. It leaves a mark. It's a mark that's left on your soul, and often that's a mark that's left by something where you suffered, something where you experienced discomfort or even great grief or tragedy. I lost 2 marriages through my own foolishness, through immaturity, through circumstance, whatever. I lost a fortune. I went through bankruptcy court. My first business boomed and busted. And so, I think I wouldn't have wanted any of those things. They were all awful at the time, but they've also, I think, made me not just a better person, but a more empathetic person. And I think that's made me a better writer. I think it's made me a better person, but it's also made me a better friend. And if you're going to write anything more than an instruction manual for an air conditioner, you need empathy. You need to have a deep vein of empathy you can tap. Empathy for your reader and empathy for the people you're putting on the page.
That's a brilliant point, John. Like you said that very well. And the reason for that would be because you are trying to attract to an audience, and the only way to really attract the audience is empathy, is to really put yourself in their shoes, to think about it from their perspective, how they're feeling, and connect with them. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and the way I would put it is you're trying to touch an audience. You're trying to touch, readers in a way that is more than superficial. And this is the same thing if you're a speaker. I mean, if you're a speaker and you want to speak about anything more than, ladies and gentlemen, the exits are over there. I mean, if you want to actually communicate and reach people and teach people, then you've got to touch people. And the way that you do that isn't calculated. The way that you do that isn't by crafting a great speech. The way that you do that is being an empathetic person. And having that, as I said, that rich vein of human experience that you've experienced yourself, that you can reach it. I used to think it was kind of posturing when I would hear Hollywood actors say, yes, to play this role, I had to find that in myself. I had to find that place in myself where my father died and we were shot by terrorists, and I had to reach deep inside and touch some tragedy in my life. Yeah, no, they're not messing with you. They're telling the truth. That's what you have to do. That's what you have to do. I think if you're going to give a talk about how to create residual income for yourself or how to secure your financial future, it is extremely advisable that you have a deep soul understanding of what it's like to be in poverty. I'm not saying you have to have lived in poverty for years yourself, but you have to know what it's like to not have. You have to know what it's like to go to bed worrying and being up half the night worrying because the money's not there and you have no idea where it's coming from and people are depending on you. That makes you a wiser person around the area of finance, makes you a wiser person around the area of anything, really. So yeah, I don't recommend suffering, but that doesn't matter because it's going to happen anyway. So that it does can be a rich and wonderful asset if we can survive it.
If we can survive, is the key, right?
Yeah, and not just get cold and bitter from it.
A beautiful response. By the way, I send my warmest. I'm really sorry to hear about your loss for your son. So.
Oh, thank you. So many years ago, but I appreciate that.
You're welcome, John. So John, moving now, we're going to pivot into different stuff. The books. So let's talk about the books. How many books did you write, and what are their names? And before you get started with that question, I want to do a little show and tell. So, folks, that's The Go-Giver.
That is so. It's true.
John David Mann and Bob Burg. It sold over 1 million copies now, right, John?
Yes, correctamundo.
Okay, and then here is John's new book.
Ah, sweet.
So we can match now.
Nice, very nice. Our screens match. Yeah, so John, this is
go ahead. About that? Go ahead.
Yeah, this is a little bit like in the movie Good Will Hunting when Will's girlfriend asks him to name all of his brothers. Of course, he's made this all up because he doesn't have any brothers, but he rattles off all the names, right? And she says, "Say that again," and he rattles them off again because he's got this amazing mind. I'm going to try to rattle off all my titles. I can't do that. It's about 30 books. And most of them, everyone but a couple, have been co-authorships I've done with somebody else, like the two you just showed, Bob Burg, Brandon Webb. So I've some of those have been memoirs. I've written memoirs of mostly people in business, but not exclusively. I've written a memoir of a politician or a political campaigner who was also a closet alcoholic and drug addict. Fascinating memoir. Brandon's memoir, The Red Circle, memoir of a Navy SEAL sniper. A memoir of Rita Davenport, who was a wonderful speaker and president in the direct selling world. John Addison, who was a co-CEO of Primerica, I guess, and so that's one world. Then a bunch of nonfiction books, kind of like how we had Dan Burrus on your Clubhouse a couple weeks ago. Books like Flash Foresight and so on, and then a bunch of parables like The Go-Giver, which I love these. The Go-Giver Parables is a whole series. There's the Latte Factor with David Bach, which is about finance, about how to create financial freedom, the three principles of financial freedom. There's one called Out of the Maze, which I wrote with Spencer Johnson, which is the sequel to Who Moved My Cheese. Everybody knows Who Moved My Cheese. Yeah, not everyone knows there's a sequel called Out of the Maze, which is which was something that I did a couple of years
I didn't
ago.
know that, John. I didn't know that was the sequel to that book.
That was a wild experience.
Wow.
Spencer, whom I knew because I had worked with him, Spencer had been one of my idols early on. When Bob and I wrote The Go-Giver, we had no publishers, we had no agents, we had no access to anything. But we wrote it figuring, well, if we can't sell this thing, we'll self-publish it and sell it ourselves. And this is the days when self-publishing wasn't as easy as it is now. But I managed to get hold of an agent. I through a series of what we tend to call coincidences, and of course there is no such thing. So a series of fortuitous circumstances, I got connected to this agent, who was the agent who sold the One Minute Manager, Spencer Johnson and Ken Blanchard, which was amazing because Bob and I had put together a mock-up cover for the Go-Giver, and on that mock cover, this is like our creative visualization, right?
Mm-hmm.
It said The Go-Giver, 6 million copies sold or something, which wasn't true. It hadn't even been published. And it was an endorsement from Oprah, which we totally made up. And it said forward by Spencer Johnson, who was my writing idol at the time. And we managed to land the agent who represented Spencer Johnson. So she's represented all the Go-Giver books. A couple of years later, I actually met Spencer and worked with him on a project. And so a few years after that, Spencer was working on a sequel to Who Moved My Cheese. Who Moved My Cheese sold, was it over 16 million or over 25 million? I forget, many copies.
Wow.
One of the most successful business books of all time. And he wanted to write a sequel and he had ideas for the sequel and he was never able to quite put it together. And he died. He had pancreatic cancer. He died a couple of years ago. And the publisher approached me and said, would you write the sequel? So that was an instance of ghostwriting where the person I was writing with was actually deceased. It was like I had to imagine Spencer sitting next to me in a chair and kind of channel him and write in the style of Who Moved My Cheese, which was a amazing, wonderful, terrifying experience. So that's that parable. But the latest series of books for me have been the military books and now the thriller. Steel Fear with Brandon, and that's a series. I've just about finished writing the second one, which will come out next year, and on we go. I'm a novelist now.
Yeah, congratulations on that, by the way.
Hey,
so John, going back because you said something, I don't want to dismiss that. So the publisher of Who Moved the Cheese actually approached you. They called you and said, can you take this on? Because Spencer's passed away. So
as it happened, the guy who had contracted with Spencer to publish this book when it would eventually get written was the same guy who bought the Go-Giver. It was our Go-Giver publisher.
Okay.
And so he knew my work, and he said it would be good to get John to finish this project. So that's how that came together.
Wow, that's really amazing. So you have an unbelievable arsenal of books of a wide variety of topics, and one that you didn't bring up, John Assaraf. I didn't even know that you ghost wrote that, which is true. The Answer. That's really cool.
That was neat because that was early on, and that was an opportunity. I spent some time with John, and it was an opportunity to really delve into his whole area, his specialty, which is the neuroscience and sort of quantum physics, if you will, of positive thinking and affirmation and visualization and sort of all of that, which he's so adept at teaching. So yeah, it was a phenomenal experience writing that book.
Wow. All right, John. So thank you so much, sir. Let's talk about our next topic, which is similar. So you are a multiple New York Times best-selling author, and depending on what books you count into that, if you count the ghostwriting books, that brings the number higher. How many New York Times bestsellers do you have right now?
At this moment, 4.
Is that counting John Assaraf?
Yeah. Yep.
And possibly 5 if you get the Steel Fear.
It's always possible. That's right.
Okay.
We're getting there.
All right.
Moving in.
How are you doing with that, by the way? Because you just released that, I think.
Doing great. Yeah, just released. I mean, it's weird because you think, okay, he's written 30 books, so he's like, you got the whole book world thing down. Yeah, yes and no. Writing fiction is completely different from writing nonfiction. Honestly, Dr. Finance, I had no idea. Brandon and I, both of us, had no idea when we started this project, which was years in the making. It's totally different in terms of sort of the process of it. because fiction, especially a thriller, is kind of like writing a nonfiction book is a little bit like taking people through a museum. It's like being a tour guide. We're going to go and look at this room. Okay, chapter 2, we're going to go and look at this room and look at this exhibit and this exhibit. Okay, now we're going to go in this next room. And it's kind of relaxed and it's kind of easy and there's a flow. Writing a thriller is like taking a dozen terrified people running across a tightrope that's strung over the Grand Canyon. And there is no net. You cannot let it drop. You cannot let the tension, pause for even a second. For 460 pages of this book, and it's like the first draft was 150,000 words, and sent it to our agent, and she said, "This is good. Of course, it has to come down to 100,000." It's like, what? That meant. So every third word has to go? Every third letter?
Oh, you need 100,000 words for?
Yeah. I mean, roughly speaking, every genre has kind of its kind of standard length, which sounds arbitrary, but really there's a lot that's gone into that. The same way, a standard screenplay is like 120 pages, 90 to 120 pages. Well, it's the same thing with novels and with fiction. There are specific lengths that, if you're Stephen King or James Patterson or Lee Child or somebody, then you can probably get away with just about anything. If you're J.K. Rowling, you can write like 1 billion pages in a fantasy, and that's awesome. But if you're unknown, and here's the thing, Brandon and I were unknown. Yes, I may have all these New York Times bestsellers. Yes, I may have been on all these lists and a million copies. But that's in a different world. That's in nonfiction. So fiction's a whole different world. I am answering your question, by the way. I'm going to get to the answer
this
here.
Is good stuff. Good stuff.
Fiction's a whole different world, which meant we basically had to prove ourselves from scratch. It meant that, a lot of the people that I like to turn to for endorsements for my nonfiction books, for example. I've had, lots of lovely, wonderful people have written endorsements for covers of my book. None of that flies for a thriller. Nobody wants to know what Seth Godin or John Maxwell or Simon Sinek has to say about a thriller.
That is really funny. That's so funny to hear that from you. It's so true, though.
So we have been incredibly fortunate and blessed in that some really famous crime writers, Lee Child, Brad Thor, and Steve Barry and Robert Crace and a whole bunch of people have been really generous and opened their arms and said incredible things. We got a Lee Child quote across the front cover of the book and a bunch of fantastic quotes in the back. And these guys haven't just like put a blurb on the front. They've been active in telling their followers on social media about the book and then tweeting about the book and talking about the book. So it's been really, really, really a magnificent experience. I have heard for years, they are, Brad Thor, Robert Crace, and so forth. I've heard for years people say that crime writers are the nicest people. And I always thought, that kind of sounds like an oxymoron, but it's absolutely true. It's absolutely the truth.
How many, just to go back, you said how many thousands of words did you originally have before you had to break it down to 100,000?
So I want to preface this by saying this has never happened in any of my nonfiction books. Closest thing was a book called Mastering Fear, which I wrote with Brandon, which is a book about applying principles that he's learned in special operations and that I've just observed in my life to mastering fear. 5 steps. It's a 5-step plan, kind of map to mastering fear in your life. That book, I had a fantastic editor who had me bring it down probably 20%, tighten the book up, and that was awesome. But that was nothing like this. This was a finished thriller, 150,000 words, which we had to shrink to 100,000 words.
Oh, you had 150,000 words, and you
had 150.
Oh, okay.
Take it down to 100, exactly.
Wow.
And without losing any of the story, without losing any. In fact, one of my teachers, Harry Bingham, who's a wonderful crime novelist in England, he says the goal here is to take out words without removing any of the story. It's like we actually did take out some characters. We took out whole chapters. We took out stuff that was cool, that I loved, but it didn't advance the story. I've done a little bit of writing here and there about some of the things we took out on my blog mostly. People are curious; they can see. But yeah, it was a mind-boggling, incredible learning experience just to bring that first book to a place where publishers would even look at it, let alone put up money for it.
But you know what, John, if you do it, if this takes off, which I know it will, future editions, if you made a revised edition, you can start putting that stuff back in there slowly and be like, this was a left out chapter, or, you know.
Here's something funny. I mentioned Mastering Fear, right? That book. There was a passage in there that was a really cool passage about Brandon going underwater in a dive exercise, going under a ship, a battleship in the harbor of San Diego, and what that experience is like being underwater, and the danger of being sucked into a vent and turned into fish food. And it was pretty wild. And I had to cut it out, and I kept it, and I ended up using it in Steel Fear. So the stuff that I cut out, there's stuff that I cut out that I'll end up using somewhere. You never throw things like that away.
That's a good point, John. So what does it take to become a New York Times bestselling author?
It takes really three things. It takes a great concept. It takes a gripping, compelling concept that immediately, just upon hearing, makes people go, huh? Or makes them go, ooh. Makes them do something, right? It makes them go, I want to see that movie, or I got to buy that. So the Go Giver did that. Bob had a great concept. It was Bob's concept.
The wow factor, I think they call it, right?
Yeah, and in this case, it's the huh factor. Go Giver, huh? It's like, I know what a go getter is. What's a go giver? So, Steel Fear. Here's the story of Steel Fear. A disgraced, damaged Navy SEAL stalks a serial killer on an aircraft carrier in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. After we sold the book to publishers, we were pitching it to Hollywood, to producers in Hollywood. And all we had to say was that. And people would go, tell me more. I mean, because it's a cool concept. It's a compelling, gripping, fascinating concept. Not every book has that, but I would venture to say every book that does really well has that. Every movie that does really well has that. It has something that's unique. It's never quite been done before. It's familiar enough so people know what you're talking about, but it's just different enough so they go, that's something I've never seen before. So that's the first thing. You need a great concept. Second thing you need is great execution. And what that means depends on what you're talking about. Book, lecture, movie, blog post, article, clubhouse broadcast, whatever your medium is, but you need great execution. In the case of a book, that means that the writing has to be phenomenally good. I have a wonderful friend who's a thriller writer in the UK, award-winning suspense writer. And she finished a book, gave it to her agent, and agent said, this is fantastic, but it has to be rewritten. And she says she ended up in the shower that day just crying. Her husband found her in the shower crying. She said, because I've done my best. I've given it my all. I have done the best that I can. And she came out later and she said to him, what I realized? I got to do better than my best. And she did. And that's what you have to do. That's for a book to really do well. You have to do better than your best. You have to raise your own level of excellence. That's execution. But the weird thing is, a great concept and great execution will not do it. You also need great visibility. You need great exposure. And that's tough. That's something that I'm not actually great at. It's not my forte. You need what in publishing circles they call a platform. And a platform simply means a place to stand on where you can reach people. Publishers want to know, if you want to bring them, this is especially true in nonfiction, but it applies to fiction to some degree too. You bring a proposal to a publisher, and I do to a publisher, they want to know how good is the book, but the first thing they want to know is, what's your platform? What your platform means, how many people can you reach, like right now? And what that really means is, how many copies can you sell? Mm-hmm. By your personal reach, by your personal effort. I mean, yeah, they may engage promotional mechanisms. They may perform some marketing. You may hire a promotion person, a publicity agent. You may do all kinds of things to promote your book. What a publisher wants to know is, before we get into any of that, like right now, if you had the book today, how many copies can you sell? And so a really good piece of advice to people who want to make publishing, to want to make writing a career move for them, is to build your platform, build your reach, build your audience, build your readership. And I think we talked about this in one of our clubhouses, might have been with Christine Kane.
Mm-hmm.
The most valuable readership you have, the most valuable audience you have, is your engaged audience, by which I mean an audience you have personally engaged with. You have had two-way communication, two-way involvement,
Mm-hmm.
which through social media is more possible, more available than ever before, but that doesn't mean it's automatic. It means you still have to do it. In the old days, writers could only do this by going on tour, going to bookstores, signing books, and talking to people, pressing the flesh like retail politicians, which is great. Now we can do it online, but it takes the same energy, takes the same industry, takes the same effort, takes the same caring and involvement and interest.
So to sum up your last tip, basically, it comes down to marketing, which translates to finance ultimately, because you got to be able to get people to buy your books, which turns into making a profit and all that stuff for the publishers. I mean, they're looking at the bottom line. If
Yes.
you can find a way to increase their bottom line, and generally that's done through serious marketing. So John, I want to talk about.
I just want to
go ahead.
append to that because it is through serious marketing, but at the same time, there's marketing and there's marketing. And one thing that I've really observed firsthand and also secondhand is in publishing is you can do public marketing, which is great. Jim Patterson does television ads, for God's sake, for his books, which is like, wow. You can, take out ads in the New York Times. You can have, blitzes of email lists, which our publisher did for Steve Field. They blitzed this email list and that email list, and that's great. But nothing takes the place of you doing what Bob Burg does. He does retail marketing. He is on his social media every morning at 5 or 6 o'clock, interacting with everybody on the planet who mentions the Go-Giver. Bob is answering them and
He
saying,
does a great job too, by the way.
Doesn't he? Yeah, he is like nonpareil, bar none. He is the master at that. And I aspire. I don't do as much as Bob does. Plus, which he spends hours doing it, and I'm writing. I'm busy, but that's engaging with people. That level of marketing it's much smaller. You can't reach as many people as a big professional marketing campaign can, but the quality of that is completely different. And what that quality translates into is powerful word of mouth. People will tell people who tell people who tell people. There's that buzz, that word of mouth buzz, which everybody in marketing has known forever and will ever know forever. There's nothing that replaces word of mouth marketing.
I'm really glad you actually reminded me. I told this to Bob too. What you just said is how I'm actually talking to you right now. I just forgot 2 years ago, about 2-3 years ago, a friend of mine gave me this book. This is not I didn't buy this book. And he wrote me this big thing on the inside here. And he said, there's 3 books you need to have, and the Bible's one of them. He said, this is the second one.
Wow,
I'm not even going to tell you what the third one is, but that's how word of mouth
Crocker
led me to here.
That's important.
Yeah.
Julia Child's French cookbook. No. That's really cool. That's really sweet. And I'll tell you, it's interesting. I think this is the Go-Giver has been the most, I'm holding it up, but you can't see it because of my background. I think it's one of the most gifted books I know. That is to say, people give it to other people. And that's just incredibly gratifying, but it's also really a testimony to the fact that it's got that factor to it. Yeah, that's the best marketing there is, personal.
So John, real quick on that point. So you don't have, according to you don't have that strong of a marketing background. That's why you co-author with other people. You're more of a writer, and
yes.
You've actually teamed up with some of the best, I guess you'd call them marketers out there, like Bob and Daniel Burrus. They just have a giant network, especially David Bach. What is so you want to talk a little bit about that, your strategy, how were able to succeed, not having that weakness, you know what your weakness is, and you just found other people that can fill that gap in and still become a success playing on your strengths.
Yeah, I mean, and it's fun. I did spend years in sales, in direct sales, but in that world, to be honest, most, and I was pretty successful. I earned a lot of money and built a big organization, but most of what I did in that world was teaching, rather than personal selling. I'm a good teacher. I like to teach. I've always been a teacher. I was a child of teachers. My parents were teachers, so I love to teach. I love to talk. I love doing podcasts like you and I are doing right now. But yeah, marketing is not really my strength. I can sort of do it the same way I can sort of do graphic design. But my mother once told me, if you're in a shipwreck and you see a wooden piano top floating through the water, grab it, because it may hold you up. That doesn't mean that the best way to design a life preserver is it to make it in the shape of a piano top. Well, I can function as a marketing person or as a design person, but that doesn't mean the best way to make a marketing person is to make it me. Mm-hmm. I'm just a piano top. I'm not a life preserver. So yeah, it's not my strength. And I have partnered with, started with Bob, and it's been Dan Burrus and John Assaraf and Bob Burg and David Bach and a whole lot of other people who have, in our partnerships, borne the brunt of the marketing. Here's something interesting I discovered, though, since you're asking. It sounds like a nice, neat mathematical formula, right? Like, I lack this function, he has that function. I plug into him with my writing, he plugs into me with the marketing, and boom, we're off to the races. And yeah, that's the theory of it. And it has sort of worked that way. Still, what I've found is that, yes, you can take care of your health by going to a doctor, but in this world, it would be a good idea if you learn a little bit about health yourself, if you want to live to a ripe old 90, right? Mm-hmm. It's not a bad idea if you know a little bit about how your car works. Well, if you're a writer, it's a good idea if you know a little bit about how marketing works. One of the things that savvy writers will tell you is that the number one thing a writer needs to cultivate is an email list, is a readership of people who will buy their books. Whether it's 1,000 people or 50,000 people or 500,000 people, you need to build your list. And to do that, you need to do whatever minimal steps it takes. Build your website, have a Facebook presence, have whatever. I think that for years, I was somewhat deluding myself. I'll just confess this, to think that I could just sort of go into my room and write, and somebody else would handle the marketing. Yes, that's worked mostly, but I've discovered it's really also necessary for me to learn that somewhat. And I can't just say, well, that's my weakness, so I don't need to do that. I think, it's kind of like you and I had this conversation when we were on with Christine Kane. Mm-hmm. You'd think that once you finish your book and turn it over to the publisher, they're going to handle the proofreading and the typesetting and the design and the cover. And yeah, they are, but you can't ever let it go. You can't ever just say, well, I'm done with that. That's their business now. Because I can promise you, you will find things the proofreader missed. You will see things the designer missed. Your presence has to be there with it the whole way through. In the same way, if you're a parent, your presence needs to be there with your kid all the way through school, right? All the way through. It's like you can't say, well, they're on their way to grade school now. My job is done. It doesn't work that way. So it's the same for marketing. I mean, my partnerships have worked out really well for me, but it doesn't absolve me and doesn't absolve any of us as writers from the need to have a good grasp of what it takes to market a book, what it takes to build a readership, more accurately. So by the way, it's two different things. Market a book is one thing. Build a readership is really what we're talking about.
Would you say these days you're now focusing also to build up your own influence?
More so.
This is just my observation. It seems like exactly what you said. You were kind of passing it to Bob or whoever, let them do the marketing, but then you came to the realization that I got to do this stuff too.
Yeah.
Or is it now that this is your time now? You're starting to.
Yeah, exactly. I'm focusing on that more, and it's I can't let it take away from writing, which is
Yeah.
the key reason. It's the reason I'm on the planet, as far as I'm concerned. But I am putting more of a focus on it. Brandon has left the service it was 2006, I think, and became an entrepreneur, and that's what he's been doing for the 15 years since. Not 15 years, sorry. Yeah, something like that, 15 years. And he now owns a multi-million-dollar media company. He's been a phenomenally successful entrepreneur. He's also had phenomenal failures that he's learned from phenomenally. We've written about all these things in our books, Total Focus and Mastering Fear and others. So, well, one thing I've observed from him is he's great at hiring phenomenal talent. He'll hire a CFO. He'll hire a fantastic marketing person, a fantastic tech person, but he also delves into those subjects and learns them himself, because you have to know what your CFO is doing. Well, when they explain what they're doing, it can't be like Greek to you. It has to be like English to you. You have to know what your marketing is person. You can't just say, hey, you're the Facebook guy, you handle it. You kind of need to know how Facebook works. You need to know. So it is incumbent on you as the owner of a business. And when you're a writer, that's what you are. You are an owner of a business, which is called this book, right? And of a larger business, which is called this readership. It's incumbent on you. Yes, you have a specialty, you have an area of focus, but to have a solid working grasp of every other area that touches your business, not so you can micromanage, but so that you can manage.
Beautiful. Thank you, John. I appreciate that. Oh, wow. We're really giving our audience something today.
Good.
This is key, folks. If you ever want to get into the writing business, as John said, it really is important to understand that you're not just writing a book. It's beyond that. Like, the book's not done when it's done. It's just beginning, actually.
I was a quick one. I was on a panel the other night with Sandra Brown, who was one of the icons of, she's a thriller writer and a romance writer. And there were Brandon and me and Sandra Brown and another writer, 4 of us on this panel. And one of the questions that came up was, what words of advice do you have for an aspiring writer? And she said, I always turn that question around with a question of my own, which is, how hard do you want to work? And I just think it's a really great thing to point out that writing successfully means writing really well, which means it is, it's a lot of labor in the craft. You have to love the labor of it. You have to just be in love with it.
Yeah, and John, to follow through with that, actually, that's why we have a lot in common, because all this other stuff that I do, it's really because I'm an educator first, but even before that, I like to write. And the only way that I can get my books to shine is to learn all these other things to raise that bar that you were talking about.
Yes.
So thank you, John. All right, John, we got a lot of questions and I want to respect your time. So let's figure about a minute or two on each one of these. The next question is, why do you write about a variety of different topics? Is there a common ground between all of them?
There are some common grounds. Leadership is a topic that always fascinates me, and it tends to show up in all these different forms, which is important because leadership in our lives shows up in lots of different forms. So yeah, there are common themes in my writing, but I like stretching. I like stretching out. I've never wanted to stay in one place. When I was a cellist, I didn't just play Bach. I didn't just, I listened to Brahms, I listened to Bach, I listened to Philip Glass, I listened to modern. I like stretching out. I think it's important.
That sounds like what Daniel Burrus was saying a few weeks ago about becoming a visionary. You really have to try different things. I think he said he does one new thing a year.
That's right. Every
right?
year he learns to play the flute or to skydive. Yeah, he does a new thing every year. That's really cool. He's such a character.
That's a great idea. I'm
not as structured as him.
Yeah. Well, thank you, John. I appreciate that. All right. So the next one would be, why would someone okay, we're going to talk about ghostwriting now for a little bit, because you do have that part of you. So you started out as a ghostwriter. Why would someone become a ghostwriter when they can use the same energy to write their own books?
Yeah, I think, and I didn't exactly start out as a ghostwriter. I started out as an editor.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I spent over a decade editing other people's stuff, which was great experience that helped feed into the craft of editing my own stuff. It's easier to edit other people's stuff because, frankly, you don't care about it as much. It's not your own kid. It's somebody else's kid, right? You care about it, but it's not yours. It's a little different. So that was really, really good schooling and training for me. Then came the Go-Giver and, and co-writing books. A Go-Giver is like 50-50, me and Bob. It's not ghostwriting, it's co-writing, like Steal Fear is co-writing. But I soon had the chance to ghostwrite. And writing other people's memoirs is a great example of ghostwriting. Why would you want to do that? First of all, it's if you're making your income, pragmatically speaking, if you want to make a career as a writer, it's a great way to make an income because the other person has a story that the world wants to hear. They have a certain level of fame or cachet or notoriety. They have they may have a readership or a built-in readership, or a publisher that wants to get their story out because of whoever they are, whatever their experiences. I'm a former cellist. Brandon is a former Navy SEAL sniper. Well, guess which one publishers are more interested in publishing about a story about? So to ghostwrite a story about how someone becomes, is a child of two hippies in Canada and becomes the director or co-director of the Navy SEAL Sniper Academy, is probably more interesting than trying to ghostwrite the story of a kid who played the cello in New Jersey. I mean, I'm sure my story is interesting too, I suppose. So ghostwriting is a way of using your skills, getting paid for it, and also learning how to tell a story, learning how to tell somebody else's story. It's a fantastic, proving ground for your chops, for your skills.
So on that note, John, why did you decide to switch from being a ghostwriter to a public author? Why in your case?
It isn't so much that I ever actually switched. A lot of what I've done in writing has been a combination of what has come along, opportunities that have come along to me, and they've come along through my agent or through connections of people I knew who knew people who knew people. So part of that has been just sort of what's come up, and has seemed to me like this would be a cool next step to take my skills further, to take my experience further. But part of it is that for me, ghostwriting is like playing in the section of a symphony orchestra where you're one of 6 cellos and you're one of like 50 strings. And it's really enjoyable. And I've done that. It's beautiful. But it's not the same thing as being in a string quartet where there's 4 of you on the stage. And that isn't the same thing as being a soloist and being on the stage and just you in the audience, which is a unique experience. Writing, being an author yourself is like being on stage yourself. It's communicating directly you and the audience. And that's a pretty sweet experience. Steal Fear, I wrote with Brandon. It's kind of like playing cello on stage with a piano accompaniment. Right? Brandon's the piano, I'm the cello. It's just us. So I hope that answers that question. It is a more direct and personal interaction with the readership.
Yeah, absolutely it does, John. And I just want to commend you because a lot of people, the reason this question comes up is because there are a lot of ghostwriters that just write the rest of their life as a ghostwriter.
Which is awesome.
You've had, and that's, if it works for them, good for them. But for you actually had bigger goals. Like you wanted to eventually get your own book and you wanted to make great books and then eventually make a novel. So like you kept like pushing the envelope at every single meeting of every goal that you set. You want to go to the next goal, which I commend you for doing that, and you're pushing your skill set as a writer to its fullest.
And I want to stress that the guys who play the cello in the string section of the symphony and do that for their whole lives, somebody who ghostwrites for their whole life, that's an awesome thing. My brother plays string bass in the symphony. He's been doing it his whole life. I played cello in that same orchestra. I knew that on the cello, I would never be Yo-Yo Ma. I would never be sitting on the stage as a solo career artist. I don't really have the chops to do that in the cello. So writing is an opportunity to do that. Lee Child, who writes the Jack Reacher books, says that writing is, what did he say? Writing is, oh crap, I'm gonna mess up the quote. So it's
okay, paraphrase whenever you forget.
Acting for shy people. There you go. Yeah.
Thank you, John.
That's where it is.
And just flipping this conversation to the other side for about a minute or less, why do people hire ghostwriters? So let's say I'm, famous celebrity XYZ.
Yeah.
Why would I want to hire a ghostwriter instead of just writing it myself?
Because they're smart, because they're smart, and it's knowing what you can do and knowing where your strengths are, where they aren't. There are people who can stand on a stage and tell a fabulous story, but cannot for the life of them put it on a page. The written word and the spoken word are very different. And there are also people who have had phenomenal experiences. You listen to them in a boardroom, or you listen to them on the deck of a battleship, and they're incredible. But they don't have the skill set to bottle that on the page. And it makes sense to hire somebody who has the skill set to bottle that and put it on a page. And that's what a ghostwriter is. I'm taking your life experience and saying, okay, as the crafter of stories, how would I tell your story? What are the themes? What's the arc of it? What are the high points? What's the struggle? Where does it begin? Where does it end? What's the opening scene? What's the closing scene? This is all shaping your story. It's all your story. It all really happened. You know it all because you lived it all. But it's amazing how much of our lives we forget. When I do somebody else's memoir, it's really interesting how much I have to pull the story out of them because they've forgotten like 3/4 of the stuff. We all do, right? Mm-hmm. And I say, well, what did your bedroom look like? Or whatever the details are. It's really, really fun to do that. That is a skill set, like an architectural skill set, that if you want to tell a compelling story, it just makes sense. There are those people who have the story to tell and happen to be able to tell it themselves. Michael J. Fox, the actor, I love reading his books, which he writes himself, I believe. There are lots of people who write their own books, Barack Obama, Bill Clinton. I mean, there's lots of people write their own stuff, but the majority of people with fascinating stories, they don't have that skill set, and that's fine. They hire us.
That's a great point. I guess I'm biased, because being a writer, I just, sometimes you forget. But yeah, a lot of people don't like to write. They hate it.
Yeah,
or
really just don't know how to start it, don't know how to end it, don't know how to do the stuff in between.
Thank you, John. Appreciate that. All right, so John, I just want to clean up a little bit of house on the writing stuff, because having you on here is being an expert writer. I think for our fans that may think about writing a book, just want to talk about collaboration of books. Okay, so can you still say you wrote a book if there's a group of other collaborating authors? So basically what we're trying to do is figure out the proper usage of co-author versus author, and like to what degree. So if you co-author a book, obviously you got two people, you're a co-author, right? But what happens in these big collaboration books? There's 50, 100 people. There's 13 steps to riches that I'm in. There's, I think, 33 to 40 per book, plus the celebrity authors. So we could say we're co-authors. When I mentioned, John or Jane, we're co-authors, but what about, like, how do you
here's how I would answer that. So if you contributed a chapter to a book, or a section to a book, then for me, the term that applies there is contributor. You're a contributor to a book. I'm not even sure you can really legitimately say first of all, there's no legislation about this. There's no rules. So, you can kind of do what you want to do, but it's sort of the question of what's right, what makes sense, what communicates the reality best to people. And if you contributed a chapter to a book, but you didn't really have anything to do with all the other chapters, you just had to do with this chapter, you're a contributor to the book. I don't think you can even say you're a co-author of a book, because you didn't participate in the rest of the book. If you contributed in some way to the entire book, right? I mean, if they consulted you about the contents of the entire book, then you may have co-author status there. I did a book I had a ghostwriter of a ghostwriter once. I did a book called The Secret Language of Money, and it's I think my favorite book cover of everything I've ever done. It's anyway, look it up on Amazon, The Secret Language of Money, Kruger, Krueger, and man, me, and tell me if you don't just love that cover. Anyway, Dave Kruger's the guy. It was his teaching about money that I was the co-writer, the ghostwriter. But it was at a time when I was really, really busy and I couldn't quite pull up a schedule. So I brought in a friend of mine, Dan Clements. And so he was the ghostwriter's ghostwriter, and Dan actually drafted stuff and gave it to me. And I took his stuff and I said, okay, well, we'll do this and this and this and this. And I drafted more stuff and then I gave it to Dave. Dan could credibly be called a co-author, because even though he isn't even named on the cover, and even though he wasn't named as a contributor on the title page of the book and just thanked in the credits, he had something to do with the entire book. But if you just contribute a chapter to a book, I would call you a contributor.
So, but how would that person reference the other person? So you would say
co-contributor or other contributor, many contributors.
Fellow contributor.
Mm-hmm.
Co-contributor. Okay.
Yeah, it's like having an article of yours published in a magazine.
Yeah.
You know, you're an author of that article, so you're the author of that chapter. So you can call yourself an author. I am the author of that chapter. I just don't think it's necessarily right to call yourself the author of that book, or even a co-author of that book, because you're really you know what I'm saying? You're a contributor to the book. You authored that chapter.
You're right, though. There is no laws on this. It's kind of like the Wild West. And if you look at the way, this is really an important discussion, because if you look at the way a lot of really successful people will label their resume, oh, I wrote over 100 books. Okay, did you actually write them with just your name on them? No, I was, co-author, and so like I put a testimonial in a book, so that counts as a book. Like what's your thoughts on that? You put a testimonial in a book. Can you say you wrote the book?
I have seen people talk about their best-selling book, and it was best-selling because like their neighborhood block association liked it or something. I mean, it's like the word bestseller and the word best-selling have been so horrifyingly debased as a currency that you really have to look and say, well, best-selling where? And there's sort of conventions in the publishing world. Like if you were in the New York Times bestseller list, or the USA Today bestsellers, or the Wall Street Journal, or Business Week, or LA Times, or kind of one of these recognized vehicles of and not that these recognized vehicles are fair, by the way. New York Times list is notoriously weird and unfair and unbalanced and skewed about who they select and who they don't. It's not just about numbers, but it's still it's a paper of record. There are sort of recognized bodies that are bestseller. If you're on the Amazon list of all books as like number 15, then that's an impressive thing, and that's worth putting on your resume. That's worth saying. But if you're the number 5 book on a list of all polo players with Ukrainian grandmothers who have survived divorce, who have only one leg, that's a pretty small list. So I think you kind of have to use your judgment. We all want to be recognized for our book's value. We all love our books. They're our children. So I understand how everybody wants to be able to say good things about their book. I'm the same way. But I think we have to kind of use our judgment about just which credentials we sort of gin up for our websites and our resumes.
Thank you, John. Appreciate that. It's actually a really funny discussion. I mean, if we could probably talk about it for hours.
Yeah, we could. Let's not.
All right. So, next question: pros and cons of writing solo versus varying degrees of co-authoring a book. So, why would you rather go on your own? We kind of talked about this before. Maybe just a minute or less, if you want to summarize.
Sure. I mean, I wrote a book this year called How to Write Good, or at least Gooder. And this is a book that has no co-author at all. It's just me. And I right now it's I made it available as a free download on my website. I will probably publish that as an actual real book, by which I mean through a publisher, and you can buy it hardcover, ebook, audiobook, blah blah. But so far I haven't done that, but I will. That's a book that's solo. What a phenomenal experience. I mean, there is something really, really just wonderful about. It's kind of like if you made a cabinet with your own hands. Like if you took lumber and you cut it and you put it together and you sandpapered it and you shellacked it and you go, I made this, like Tom Hanks in Castaway going, I have made fire. It's really fun. And also everything is your call. Everything that goes into the book, it's your call. And there is something unique and exciting about that. And it goes back to something I said a little bit earlier. It means you're having a really direct, immediate, and very personal communication with your readership. Your engagement with your readers is your engagement with your readers, and that is very, very satisfying. It's very soul satisfying. Whereas if you're a co-author in any way, shape, or form, ghostwriter, co-writer, whatever you are, it's a shared experience. It's like being part of a singing group. It's great.
There's a lot of
but it's not just
cooperation. I guess what's the word I'm looking for? When you're collaborating, there's a lot of compromise that needs to be made. So you're not really getting the full experience of you. You're getting the compromised version of you and this guy and that girl and and everybody together. This is the compromisation effect of everything.
Yep.
Right.
It's true.
And the reason for me, this question is important, John, because my journey was actually as a solo author for 3 books, and that expanded over 10 years of teaching as a professor for many years. And I'm actually starting from the opposite direction. Now I'm doing these collaboration books, 13 Steps to Riches, where we do the interpretation of Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich. So that's 13 books. We got Don Green, who actually made the intro to that. He's the CEO of the Napoleon Hill Foundation. I found a reason to want to do collaboration books if it makes sense. And I'm also considering finding a reason to co-author books if it makes sense. But just I know you're a master of co-authoring. That's why I think this question, your answer to it is so valid because of your experience. Just trying to understand, if you were to go that route, from my position, if I was to go that route, like would that what's the pros and cons? What am I sacrificing? I think you said it. You're basically, there is this compromisation effect, right? Yeah.
I mean, for me, it's like being a member of a 6-person, 8-person, 12-person singing group. You get on stage and you sing, and it's awesome. It's a great experience, and people applaud you and they love it, and they buy your record and they listen to it, and that's awesome. And you're part of the group. You contribute to the group. It's an awesome thing. But it's different when they buy your album, when it's you on stage. It's just you. It is more personal. And this is not in any way to knock the 6-person, 8-person, 12-person singing group. It's not to knock the co-authorship. It's very cool. I've been doing all these events with Brandon, in tandem. Bob and I usually divide and conquer. We usually do our podcast separately, but I've been doing a lot of events with Brandon in the last couple of weeks because a lot of crime groups and podcasts and so forth have been asking us on. So it's really fun. There's 2 of us. We're like Hall & Oates, Simon and Garfunkel or whatever. It's like, it's a 2-person group experience, this book. But there's nothing like you standing on stage, singing your heart out to the audience, and it's all you, man. So you give that up to some extent. You give up a piece of your gratification, a piece of your experience, a piece of your identity when you perform as part of a group, when you write as part of a group. And so, as you say, it's a compromise. You give something up, you get something. There is a synergy to it because there is this magnificent sound. Like, what is an a cappella singing group sound? It's like amazing. You can't get that with one person, right? It's fantastic. So there is something you gain in the group effort, in the co-authorship. And that's, every cellist, violinist, or violist just adores playing string quartets. It's something a string quartet does, you can't get any other way. Same thing with brass quintet. You can't get any other way. The Beatles could never be the Beatles with only 3 people or 2 people. So there's a lot of value to that. But there is something unique about being a solo artist, a solo writer, a solo entrepreneur, a solo presenter, a solo speaker, there is something very, very cool about that. Hey, I've never done it, but Brandon certainly has. Solo pilot, something about flying a plane by yourself. We write about that in Mastering Fear. There's something about flying a plane and there's nobody in the instrument but yourself that you can't experience any other way.
Thank you, John. I appreciate that. All right. Why do you think the absolute majority of writers fail to become successful authors? And what tips do you give to new authors to help ensure their success? 1 minute or less if you can.
I mean, the broad answer is honestly, it's the same with any field, but that's kind of a cheap answer because there's lots and lots of successful electricians. So let me give a better answer. I think what stops more writers than anything else is that they don't understand the job ahead of them. So they'll write a few paragraphs and immediately criticize and say, this is crap. And you're probably right. And they start to edit it and change it. You can't do that. Writing and then assessing and rewriting and editing and revising are two different activities. You can't do them at the same time. Trying to edit yourself while you write is like trying to change the tires on your bike while you're riding it. So you have to be willing to write a lot and finish something, and finish something like whether it's a book or it's an article or it's a blog post, something short, something long. To write, put it aside, go back to it with a jaundiced eye and critique it and revise it and improve it. Be willing to throw out things that don't work, take out words that don't fit, take out ideas that don't belong, say things in a better way, a different way, a smarter way, a more condensed way. Have to be willing to work on it. There's a work involved. So I think that, honestly, most writers who don't make it, whatever it is, probably haven't worked hard enough. Sounds like a very mean thing to say, but I think it's a pretty true thing to say.
Or in my case, neglected marketing.
Yeah, like I said before, you asked about what New York Times bestseller: concept, execution, exposure. Got to have all three. You can have great execution and great exposure, and if the original concept isn't grabbing, the book will go, hey.
Yeah, just sit there.
Yeah. Yep.
Thank you, John. I appreciate. By the way, how many times do you edit your books? Just curious. Like if you have one book and you want to make it perfect, how many revision process do you go through?
It's many. I don't have a number. Many. A dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen, 4 dozen. I'm not sure. It's many.
It's a lot.
Many.
Right?
If you look in my folders on my computer, I'll have, I save each manuscript by a date with a date, and I make a copy, a new date. You might find a dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen versions of something.
Wow.
And sometimes I'm going through the whole thing with purely a look at the language, at the wording. And that's like detailed. Sometimes I go through the whole thing with big questions in mind, like has this character gone from here to there? So there's different priorities you have that you're watching as you go through it. It isn't just doing the same editing over and over and over, but I edit till it's done.
That is really funny you say that. I do a similar thing. On every revision, I have a different goal. Like you're right. Like I now I think about it, sometimes I would go through there. I'd be looking at the macro.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I might be looking at, just a chapter.
Exactly.
Oh, thank you, John. I appreciate that. What does it attract you to write books with Brandon Webb?
He's got the same values I do in relation to excellence. He knows what it's like to put in the hours and be patient and work and work and work and work. When I was a kid, I used to go to parties, and for some reason, at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 in the morning, all my friends would be horizontal, right, on couches or floors. And I would always be the guy walking around picking up the glasses and the plastic cups and the plates and emptying the ashtrays and just kind of straightening up at 4 o'clock. That's Brandon. That's me. We have that same work. We have the same work ethic. And he also has a really interesting life, and we click. So.
No, that's important. And the reason I asked you is because you wrote more books with him than anybody. I mean, basically your co-authorship with him just blew out the rest of the competition. I think, what do you got? 7 books now?
And Bob.
Oh, Bob too?
And Bob Burg. Okay. Yep. And Bob. And honestly, same with Bob. Bob's the same guy.
Yeah, because you have the sequels to the Go Giver, right?
Go Giver, Go Giver Leader, Go Giver Influencer, Go Giver Sell More, and a Teacher's Guide to the Go Giver. And in this coming spring, we're going to have the Go Giver Marriage.
Oh, wow.
That's not with Bob, though. Not with Bob. That's with my wife.
Oh, okay. Well, that sounds cool.
Part of the Go Giver family, but Bob has never been married, so he said, "I can't co-author this with you because I've never been married. It wouldn't be right." Cool. My wife and I wrote it.
Sounds like something to look forward to. When's that coming out, John?
March.
March.
Yeah.
Speaking of
it's already, by the way, it's already on Amazon. You can already pre-order it. It's already up there.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, I will definitely check that out. So speaking of the Go-Giver, tell us about the impact your books had on others, especially the Go-Giver. Because in the qualify that question on Clubhouse, I don't know if I told you this, but we get, just in the one room that I ran, we had almost 1 million people come in over, I think it was 84 days. We always get people that come up and be like, when I like to answer this question, I said, what book changed your life? And Go-Giver, like, is probably at least 25% of those answers, along with Napoleon Hill and stuff. So I guess to reiterate the question, tell us about your impact that your books have had on others, especially the Go-Giver.
That's the most amazing thing a writer could possibly hope for. It's a phenomenal thing. You said that somebody gave you the book and said there are 3 books you need to read. One's the Bible, one's the Go-Giver, and the third was, if I'm not wrong, Julia Child's French Cooking. I made that part up. Yeah, I mean, that's just really incredibly gratifying. Writing the book was a joy with Bob. Getting it published, our publishing team is awesome, but the interactions with the readers, with the readership, it's like a whole community over the planet. Has just been, it's been and continues to be just an incredibly gratifying thing, because people don't just say, "Oh, I read your book and I liked it." They say, like, it changed my life.
Yeah.
Or they say, it changed my marriage. Or they say, it's one of the most, I read this book every year. I've been reading it, for the last 10 years, and I read it. I've reread it 5 times or 8 times or whatever. I've given away 50 copies. People say these kinds of things. There's a guy named Randy in Indiana who's taught every graduating senior class in his school the Go-Giver every year since 2009.
Wow.
He has to read it and do all kinds of projects based on it. And it's like, it's in classrooms, it's in graduate school classrooms, it's in chambers of commerce, it's in boardrooms, it's in, churches. I mean, it's like, it's a pretty wild thing. It's a pretty cool thing to be part of. So much bigger than us, so much bigger than us. Everybody wants to be part of something bigger than us. It's not, not everybody gets a chance to have written the thing that turns out to be bigger than us. That's a pretty cool thing.
Thank you, John. It's a beautiful answer. All right, so John, we're going to get into just some more entrepreneur questions. Why should entrepreneurs avoid being a go-taker?
Because what goes around comes around. It's really true. If you're just looking at, here's the thesis of the Go-Giver is that if you look out for other people, the world will take care of you. If you put other people's interests first, your interests will be more than handled, well more than handled. And the same thing is in reverse. If you just are looking out for number one and nobody else, that may look successful for a time, but you're doing the opposite of making friends with the world. You're teaching the world to ignore you and distrust you and even dislike you, and it will.
What should we do if we encounter a go-taker? By the way, a go-taker is I guess you could say the opposite of the go-giver. A go-giver is a person who gives a lot. Go-takers who just wants to take.
What you should do is, I think you should be nice to them, give them everything you have. No, I'm just kidding.
You take my wallet.
You should, I would say run the other way. You can't always do that. You should do whatever you can, whatever is practical, to keep a distance and a boundary between the two of you. Quarantine, baby. It's all you can do.
Quarantine from the go-taker. I like
you can do.
All right, thank you. And what is the lesson behind the book Steal Fear? Because I know you have lessons in your book. I know I like your writing style, especially with the Go-Giver. How about Steal Fear?
Steal Fear, of course, it isn't really primarily a lesson-driven book, which a parable is. A parable is a lesson-driven book, even though I always say it has to be character-driven. And when you write it, you let the characters drive it. Because if you don't, it'll be boring. It'll be like a thinly disguised lecture, and nobody wants to hear that. This is a novel, it's a thriller, so it's not lesson-driven, but there are lessons in there. One of them is something that one of the characters said toward the end is how frequently the terrible man, this is a guy who has a view of the world as being visited periodically by what he calls terrible men, tyrants of the world, the psychopaths of the world. That how often the terrible man looks like the good guy, and that's kind of a cautionary lesson. But I think the major lesson of the book is about leadership. It's about just the impact of leadership, how deep and how wide it runs. There are great leaders and mediocre leaders and terrible leaders in the book. Characters who represent different aspects of leadership, different facets of leadership, and you see the impact of their leadership with life or death consequences in our book. Now, terrible leadership doesn't always have life or death consequences in real life. Sometimes it does. Often it doesn't. But that's there's if you read the entire book just for enjoyment and as entertainment, then when you finish it, put it away, go back to it a week later, and then read it a second time through the eyes of leadership. And just ask yourself on every page, what am I learning about leadership? What am I seeing play out about leadership? And I think there's because it's us writing, it's just that's in there.
Thank you, John. Appreciate that. All right, this is a very important question. Can one book change the world, a minute or less?
Absolutely. If that weren't true, I wouldn't be writing them. I wouldn't say everyone in mine has changed the world, but yeah, that's the reason. I think it's the reason for writing them.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I'm with you. And I don't know about in your situation. In my life, there's definitely been books that have changed my life. And
me too.
You too?
Yeah.
Let me see if I have that question. Come on. I think, well, I'm going to ask you a similar question in just a second. So let's hold that thought. What role has networking played in your life?
It's been huge. I wouldn't have, the Go-Giver wouldn't have been published without networking. It's how we found our agent. And networking for me basically is just a word that means valuing friendships, making friendships and valuing them and keeping them, holding them, growing them like houseplants, like relationships, treating relationships with care, respect, and putting value in them, because that's what networking is. And so I've had, I could give a dozen examples, a million examples of someone that I've had a relationship with in the business world where that has come back around to serve me in ways I never anticipated in the future. And, I looked at the Go-Giver as a favor in my mind first. Bob had this idea, and I was like, it was an annoyance to me because I was doing something else. I wanted to be a screenwriter. I was busy. I didn't have time. But as a favor to Bob, because I valued our friendship, I said, well, I'll take a look at this idea. And the more I looked, the more interested I got, and I ended up, we ended up co-authoring the book, and you can see what happened. So yeah, networking has been huge.
Wait, you wanted to be a screenwriter?
Yeah, that was my aspiration.
John, I apologize. In my brain, I just see something a little different now. So it seems like you wanted to be a screenwriter, and it seems like you came full circle because you're on a novel. Like, why would you be doing a novel at this stage of life, right? And you can make a movie with this book that you just made for sure. Like I read several chapters already, and I just
good. We have actually sold the screen rights already.
Wow.
Yeah, not for a movie, for a streaming TV series.
Oh my God.
We shall see.
Wow, that's so you might actually be heading back into that direction. It sounds like.
Yeah, I'm not writing that. There's a writer that we hired who's just brilliant, who's already at work on that. But yeah, you got a point there. Circles have a way of happening.
Yeah, life is funny like that.
Yeah.
All right, thank you, John. All right, we only have a few more questions here. We're going into my area now, finance, which I know you know a lot about too, because it has to do with managing money. So what is your, oh, I'm sorry. Did I ask you the mentoring question? No, I didn't ask you mentoring. Is mentoring important? And who are some of your mentors?
I mentioned a man named Harry Bingham. Harry is a crime author, and I loved his books. He writes a series of books featuring a heroine named Fiona Griffiths, who's a diminutive Welsh police woman who is severely damaged psychologically. And she's brilliant and she's just wonderful. And I loved his books, and I connected with him on email, and he's turned out to be like one of my major writing teachers and mentors. I studied screenwriting with a man named Hal Crosman in Hollywood, who, even though I haven't had produced screenplays, his teaching has been enormously influential in my writing. So I have, all my life in the cello. I mean, I had a mentor who is. Every area of my life, I always sought out people whose work I really admire. And, many times I seek out somebody whose work I really admire, and they don't end up being my mentor. I don't end up, ever getting an answer to my email or anything. And that happens. But it's been I think it's a really, really important thing to have mentors of different levels of engagement and involvement.
Just curious, John, because in our circle, it seems like everybody has Napoleon Hill as one of their so-called mentors, like not just living, we're talking about dead mentors.
I read his book, the Think and Grow Rich, that the book that people know him best for. At the same time, I read James Allen, As a Man Thinketh, and a number of other books sort of in that tradition, the tradition of the power of thought. I would say positive thinking, but it's more than positive thinking. It's about the power of thought.
Yeah.
And that was, it was around the time that I sort of first began forming a lot of the philosophies that informed my adult life. So it was enormously influential. I haven't gone back to Napoleon Hill's work, going back to the well regularly, the way I do with some fiction writers and some other books, but it was enormously influential at that point in my life, which was a very critical time. Kind of maybe who I am.
Thank you, John. Wow, that's very impressive. Yeah, I think you're talking about kind of like Bob, I don't know if you know Bob Proctor. He always talks about.
Bob Proctor is who.
Every day.
Bob Proctor, the mentor in the Go Givers, called Pindar, and he's based on Bob Proctor.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Is Bob one of your mentors too?
Yeah, but we were working together at the time. He was for a short time, he was publisher of a journal that I was editor for. And so we were colleagues and interacted. It was a blast. He was a very, very sweet man, very wonderful man. So we have, and I've interviewed him a bunch of times, and Bob, of course, knew his work. Bob Burg knew his work. And when Bob wrote the Pindar character, he didn't have a name. Bob just called him the Abundance Oracle. He didn't have a name yet, but he described him with the wavy hair and the storyteller's voice, and he described Bob Proctor to a T, and it was absolutely conscious. Bob said, Bob Burg told me this is like Bob Proctor.
Wow. And
so I eventually gave him the name Pindar, which doesn't sound like Proctor exactly. I had a teacher named Pindar. He's a disguised Bob Proctor.
That's funny. I just read this book. I told Bob this story. I forgot to tell you. I read this book and sat on my desk for like 2.5 years since my friend gave it to me. But right before Bob came on, I said, I got to read this. So that's about 3-4 months ago. And yeah.
Oh, cool. Sweet.
Okay. Thank you, John. Appreciate it. We got just a few more questions left. They're all financial related, but I'm sure you can identify with them. What are your favorite financial books? Maybe 3?
I read a book.
You can count Think and Grow Rich too, if you want.
Sure. I mean, I read a book decades ago called The 7 Laws of Money, and I haven't seen it for decades. I think the author's name was Michael Phillips. I could have that name wrong. I have to look this up. I'll look this up and I'll email you the answer, because it was very influential. It was the first book that got me thinking about money in a different way. Otherwise, I haven't read a lot of books about money. I've heard people talk about it. I've listened to teachers. When I was involved as an editor of the Upline Journal and Networking Times and Network Marketing Lifestyles and different business journals, I bumped into a lot of teachers teaching about money, but it's just not a genre I've read in a lot.
Okay. Any business books or because they're disguised under different names, finance, business. They actually call it economics, which is a big argument I have. Yeah.
I'm a huge fan of Seth Godin's, but it's not like Bob Burg has read everything in that genre, everything there is. He's read it. Not me. I mostly read fiction. So honestly, it's not an area most of what I've learned has been in interaction with other teachers, in interaction with other business people, and in, editing people's stuff and in conversation. I haven't delved between the covers of a lot of books in that genre.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you, John. All right, and here's one question. I think you don't need a book to read. Do we need money to survive?
Survive how long?
That's another good question.
My business model for writing has been, initially when I was writing, I needed to pay the bills. I still need to pay the bills. We all need to pay the bills. Initially, if I got a job that paid me $5,000, I could put it in the bank. I was grateful. Fantastic. But as soon as I was able, which was almost right away, I made my goal building a residual income out of writing. And so pretty soon I developed my business model, which is for most of the books I write, my business model is I co-author with somebody, I split it 50-50. I split the income 50-50. I may have no startup fee at all. I may have no writing fee, or I may have a small writing fee. The writing fee, the money I get up front for writing a book may be small, may be modest, but it's not the point. The point is the back end. The point is the long-term cash flow. I'm always writing a book with my eyes toward what's it going to be paying me 10 years from now? Because we all need money to survive, but more importantly, we all need money in the future to survive. We all need money to be there in the future. You can go do something and get paid for it today, but then you spend the money that you got, it's gone. You can put some of that money aside in an instrument and have it grow, and that money will be there in the future. The instrument I put most of my money into is me. And so that, I think this isn't just for writers. For whatever you do, whatever your career is, for me, I think you should design it in such a way that you're building future income, not just building today income. And that's, that to me is the critical. That's what we talked about in the Latte Factor. The Latte Factor is all about building your life, building your life going forward, as opposed to surviving today. It's about building a life of meaning, which takes financing.
And that was a beautiful response, John. What you actually described was a process I created in my last book, The Survival of the Richest. I see finance as an extension of survival. Survival starts first. And what you described was survival is for the present moment, managing wealth for the present moment, but finance is for the future. So it's not just now, it's now and later, with the idea of making sure you got enough wealth for the future, whatever that is, a year from now, 10 years, 20 years, at retirement, so
there's an expression in The Go-Giver that is survive, save, and serve, sort of the three phases of income.
Yes.
And I remember when I wrote that, I was very influenced by Bob Proctor and everything I was learning at that time about finance. And that's, everybody has to survive, but then you want to get past survival. Save means building for the future, and you want to get past saving for the future to actually building a life that has meaning, a life that has significance, which is a life where you're contributing to the world in some way that is satisfying for you. And that's serve. That's what serve is.
Thank you, John. I appreciate that. Yeah, I like that part about the book, actually. I remember asking
I bet you
Bob
did.
about that.
Yeah.
Is finance necessary for everyone?
Yeah, totally. To me, your wealth is like your health. You may think you can trust it to a doctor. You can't. It's good to get good doctors. That's a good idea, but it's your health. It's not his or her health. So if you want to maintain good health through your whole life, which you want to maintain in order to enjoy your whole life, you need to be responsible for your health. You need to understand how it operates. Same thing is true for your wealth. Yes, it's good to have good advisors and good professionals in your life around the area of money. You need to understand it yourself.
Absolutely. And folks, John is an amazing writer, but the other part of him, he's actually an entrepreneur and a successful businessman. He was able to get successful because he might not have read the finance books, but he learned through becoming an entrepreneur, right, John? Correct me if I'm wrong.
That's
Going
right.
through the natural process of becoming an entrepreneur, having his own business. All these mistakes happen and have to be learned to become to the point where he's at. So
Yeah.
so there's a lot of validity here. Okay, well, thank you, John. We got 3 last very simple questions here, and we'll wrap it up. How important is having a purpose in business, and what is your purpose? Maybe a minute or less.
Yeah, my purpose has always been, I've always been interested in taking complicated ideas and making them simple so that anybody can understand them. And that's always been fascinating to me. So that's kind of been my modus operandi. And my purpose in business is in the Go Giver Influencer. One character asks the woman named Jillian, one of the heroes of the book. He says, what's the purpose of business? She says, well, I imagine it's different for every business. And he said, no, actually, it's not. It's the same for every business. The purpose for every business is to nudge the world forward, in a positive way, is to make the world a little bit better in some way, shape, or form. A little more human, a little more efficient, a little more kind, a little more effective, a little more knowledgeable, a little more generous. My purpose in business is to touch millions of people's lives in a way that nudges them a little forward.
Thank you, John. Brilliant. What would you like to accomplish in the next 10 years or so, and why? And we can go into that screenwriter thing if you want.
I'd like to write 10 novels, 10 years, 10 novels that sell really well and that, that everybody talks about and loves and makes a difference in their lives. And, probably about half a dozen or so parables, because those are the 2 forms of writing that I found I really, really love most, and the ones I want to do, novels and parables. And at the end of that merry-go-round, I would like to take up music composition again and, write some powerful musical compositions to leave behind.
Is Hollywood built into any of this at all?
Probably not directly. I don't see myself being an active player. I'd love to see books get good adaptations, but Sue Grafton, who wrote the alphabet books, the Kinsey Millhone, A is for alibi, B and so forth, all the way through Y. She died before you could do Z. She, hugely successful writer, and she has never had her books adapted for Hollywood. She was in Hollywood for a while, but she's never allowed anybody to adapt her books. She told her kids, after I die, after I'm gone, if you all decide you want to sell the rights to my books, I'll come back and haunt you. So I'm not quite that extreme. I'd love to have adaptations, but I'd only want them to be good adaptations, not crappy adaptations. But I don't plan to be the writer of those myself. But but who knows? Writing screenplays is a blast. I love it. I know how to do it. Maybe that'll happen too. We'll see.
And I believe Stephen King said this. The problem with taking a book into a movie is that there's so much more mystery when you leave it as a book, because you can use your imagination to build your own customized version of that book. But once it's concrete, it's a movie. Right? It's just because you can't change it anymore. They already have it for you as a menu. This is what you have to look at. This is the story according to us. And it kind of strips that mystery out.
They adapted a Jack Reacher novel to a movie, and Tom Cruise played Jack Reacher. And Jack Reacher, the character is 6'5" or 6'6", 6'5", I think. Lee Child is almost that tall. And people went nuts. They said, this is awful. This is a travesty. This is terrible. He's ruined Jack Reacher. I thought Tom Cruise was a fantastic Jack Reacher. So did Lee Child, by the way. The height was not important, but to a lot of people it was. So that's those are the risks you run when you have exactly what you're saying. So yeah, I mean, we'll see. We'll see.
Thank you, John. All right, last question, John. What would you like your legacy to be to this world?
He made a difference. Hopefully it's a good difference, by the way. He ruined everything. Not that, but I'll go with he made a difference. My favorite legacy, I probably don't have it word for word, but it is in the movie, The Royal Tenenbaums. I don't know if you've seen that movie.
Possibly.
Yeah, it's a great flick. Gene Hackman is the family patriarch. He's he's a total cad, masher, con man, cheater, liar, and he's sort of making this last ditch effort to get with his family and become beloved. It's a hilarious movie, but it ends with his epigraph, and it's you'll have to go see the movie to see the epigraph at the very end. I write about it, by the way. I think it's like on one of the last few pages of my book, How to Write Good, or at least Gooder. I talked about that epigraph, and I put it in there word for word. So that'll be my substitute legacy / epigraph for this moment.
Well, thank you, John. That's awesome. I appreciate you coming today and definitely putting the extra time in, because as I told you in the beginning, I want to make sure I serve you well and give you the best interview possible. So this is, folks, this is a compilation of many of the questions that I've been asking to John during Clubhouse the few times he's been on so far, and we've had very big stages. So I wanted to put it all together because we're going to do plenty more stages together if John's okay with that.
Absolutely.
This will be our interview, and we'll say on Clubhouse, hey, go check out that interview. This is going to be it. So John, I'm going to leave the floor for you before we close out. A moment or two, a minute or two, whatever you want to say, whatever you want, where we can find your books, your website, things like that. So floor is yours, John.
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, I'll make this really, really, really quick because I've already said so many things. I won't try to add to the pile, but my nexus is, you can find out everything there is to know about me basically at my website, which is just my name, John David Mann, 2 N's, johndavidmann.com. All my books are there. I've got a blog there. I've been blogging once every 2 weeks since the beginning of the year about the background behind the scenes of Steal Fear. And if you go to the contact link and do one of those emails, it actually goes to me. There is no staff that answers that. I'm the staff. So I'm on social media too. All my links are there, Twitter and Instagram and so forth and so on. But that's the place to find me, johndavidmann.com.
Thank you, John. It was awesome. And all right, well, I want to close out, folks. Thank you for watching the Dr. Finance Live podcast. Again, this is Dr. Anthony Criniti IV. I go by Dr. Finance. This is our guest speaker, John David Mann, multiple New York Times bestselling author. Definitely check out John on his website and subscribe, follow the both of us. You can follow this podcast as well. Go to John's website and buy his books. He's got so many amazing books. So thank you again. Thank you, John. I appreciate you coming here today, and look forward to seeing everyone on the next episode. We got some amazing guest speakers coming up next week as well. So looking forward to see you guys again pretty soon. Thank you, everyone. Have a nice day.
Thank you all. Take care.